4.3 Critical Review of the Artistic Process. 4.3.1 Introduction. Following the test performance of Billy's game A Soul Parody, a focus group was held to determine who from the target audience was most likely to enjoy this play and how effectively they found the two genres to be adapted into the script and direction. The members of the focus group were specifically handpicked by the researcher to ensure that there was a diversification of gender, age groups, genre preference, and film or theater preference. 4.3.2 Defining the target audience. To determine how familiar the members of the focus group were with the local theater industry, they were asked prior to watching the performance how often they attend theater-based productions. About half of the focus group would attend theater-based productions once every few months. Almost 40% try to watch a theater-based production once a month, and almost 15% watch theater-based productions as regularly as possible. When asked whether or not anyone had ever watched Soul or any of its sequels, half of the respondents stated they had and that they were interested in the franchise, whilst those who never watched the films were not. All of those who watched at least one of the films and were interested in the franchise formed part of the 26 to 35-year-olds, whilst those who were not as interested were aged between 36 and 45 years. It was interesting that the youngest age group from the focus group were most interested in the franchise, similar to the data collected when analyzing the questionnaire in the artistic process. There was also a similarity in these results and those from the previous questionnaire because in the focus group, the data showed that those who identified as female were also more interested in the franchise than those who identified as male, non-binary, or any other preference in gender. 4.3.3 Execution of the genre. When asked to reflect on the effectiveness of the horror elements in Billy's game A Soul Parody, it was unanimously agreed that most of the horror elements were only effective when working with the comedic elements. One of the members pointed out that this could have been because people still recognize and appreciate the tropes in the horror genre, even if they were not fans of it themselves. Two notable moments from the show in which the horror worked well with the comedy were when Billy amputated Leo's hand towards the end of Scene 2 and during Roger's disembowelment sequence in Scene 4. Outside of these, the few moments when the horror alone was effective was during Claire's phone call towards the end of Scene 3, the near foot amputation in the final scene, and the overall ambience evoked through the use of music and lighting. The focus group was then asked to reflect on the comedy elements present in the show, to which everyone stated that the comedy appeared to be very effective. Along with the horror and comedy moments mentioned earlier, it appeared that the comedy worked consistently well throughout the show, thanks mostly to the writing, the references made to popular culture or other horror films, the actors' improvisation, the meta-aware breaking the fourth wall gags, and the chemistry the actors had when performing alongside each other. A few of the focus group members even pointed out how much they enjoyed the decisions the actors made to individualize their characters and make them distinctive. An example of this was whenever Leo became a hopeless romantic and turned to the corner of the stage while High School Musical's Breaking Free plays in the background to over-dramatize his brief pathos. 4.3.4 Implementation of the research. From an adaptation perspective, the focus group stated that it was an overall successful attempt in adapting a horror film into a comedic theater parody. When considering the relevance of the film in this production, what worked effectively was the decision made to incorporate moments from the film that were recognizable to those who either considered themselves to be hyper-fanatics or those who were mildly familiar with the film. These moments from the film that were then incorporated into the theater parody include setting the opening of the first scene in the bathroom, the message to Dr. Gordon, and the use of the reverse bear trap. The incorporation of comedy was what strengthened this adaptation to make it different from the film whilst paying tribute to its core and essence. The writing of the script also helped in making the characters appear relatable to the test audience and executing the meta humor whilst maintaining the ambience of the horror elements. Something that could have been further explored in the writing process, however, was experimenting with a more cohesive structure and consistent themes to ensure that the tone did not appear inconsistent. One of the themes that could have been further explored throughout the play was that of female empowerment. A member of the focus group also pointed out that because it did not directly affect the narrative, it could have been removed altogether without there being any major impact on the quality of the play. Other moments that did not appeal towards the focus group were whenever there were scenes that could have incorporated more sincerity and intensity rather than light comedic elements. This was especially the case whenever characters were seriously injured but had no notable reactions to the injuries or physical pain that they had experienced. To determine the play's relevance in Malta and whether the local audience would be familiar with the style and atmosphere of the project, the focus group was asked to recall any theatre productions that the style and atmosphere of the show reminded them of. The only local productions the members could recall were the annual Christmas pantomime, which parodies classic childhood stories, the 2005 play Halloween the Spoof, and a local production of the Rocky Horror Show from the year 2007, which was referenced for its similar atmosphere. The rest of the theatre productions mentioned were foreign productions, including those by Team Starkit and those which were featured in the annual Edinburgh Fringe Festival. Most of these were musical parodies of horror films, such as Silence the Musical and Reanimator the Musical, or comedic theatre productions including Vampire Hospital Waiting Room and Murder She Didn't Write. 4.3.5 Potential commercial success. Notable moments from the play which the focus group enjoyed include Gary Seff's monologue, which towards the very end of the play finally explained the motivation behind Billy's actions, the meta-awareness that Leo almost died wearing a poorly made replica of the original reverse bear trap, and the moment when the backstage crew came on stage to preset a prop in the middle of a scene as a means of breaking the fourth wall. The least favorite moments from the play include the slow tempo of scene 2, the random romantic scene between Leo and Martina before being interrupted by Claire, the distracting inconsistency of the characters barely reacting towards potentially dying, and the lack of information and clarification about Billy's, Claire's, or Martina's backstory. Based on their knowledge of the local arts and theatre culture, the focus group felt that the play was likely to have an impact amongst local practitioners as well as audience members. Should this play be produced for the local public, it will most likely be recommended to friends, people who enjoy horror and comedy, those who enjoy or practice improv, writers and theatre producers. This could also be recommended to social groups who go out in the evenings for leisure. Anyone interested in film, fans of Saw films, close friends, younger audiences such as students, and people who do not typically attend theatre productions, mainly because this show could introduce them and a wider audience to the theatre culture. 4.3.6 Conclusion. The feedback from the focus group determined that Billy's Game, a Saw parody, was a successful attempt in adapting a horror film into a stage parody, and it was most likely to appeal to the local public should it be produced as an official theatre production. It also appeared that from the data collected, people who identified as female and those aged between 26 and 35 were most likely to enjoy this production. This was probably because of the fact that the franchise was released quite recently and that age group had the opportunity to grow up with the franchise, so it was more relevant to them. As for the female preference, this might relate to the results gained when discussing the data collected from the questionnaire and determining that those who identified as female were more likely to enjoy the horror genre than those who identify as male, non binary, or any other gender of preference, most likely because of the female empowerment aspect which is typically featured in certain horror films.